and welcome to Press TV's debate. I'm Marzieh Hashemi. Aleppo is just about to totally return to the Syrian government control, and as the liberation of all of Aleppo is imminent, Western and regional backers of the so-called moderate rebels are in free fall and trying to figure out exactly what to do. A meeting in Paris was called and a bilateral one in Geneva, as acts of desperation are obvious. Now, despite the Syrian government's success, Western leaders continue to say that even if the terrorists lose Aleppo, the war in Syria will not be over. What do they want, and what are they looking to gain out of extending the war in Syria?
In Paris, a meeting was held by the so-called Friends of Syria, which included the U.S., France, Germany, Italy, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the UAE, Jordan, Turkey, and the EU. Few predicted any real progress would be made because for years, these countries have rejected diplomacy and fomented war by insisting that Syrian President Bashar al-Assad step down before negotiations could begin. However, a major breakthrough may have been reached.
The Syrian opposition is ready to resume talks without preliminary conditions. The talks should continue on a transparent basis within the framework of UN Resolution 2254.
Resolution 2254 was approved last December and states that only the Syrian people should decide the future of their country without insisting that President Assad step down. It calls for a transitional government to be formed within 6 months and a new constitution as well as elections in an 18-month time. Is an end to the war now in sight?
John Kerry.
Look at the bigger picture. The U.S. and French foreign minister are leaving in a few months. The German foreign minister has a far different point of view from those two nations, while Qatar is totally fed up. They're only unanimous on the question of humanitarian aid, so we must remain cautious.
It appears that the Syrian government's gains in eastern Aleppo against the terrorists have caused such a major policy shift.
We could consider that this is a major defeat for the Friends of Syria. We don't know what their next step could be because there's so much instability on their side, while there's such a united plan on the part of Syria, Russia, and Iran.
Assad and his supporters have repeatedly stressed that diplomacy is the only solution, but the insistence on undemocratic regime change has forced the conflict to go on for more than 5 deadly and destructive years. Perhaps true diplomacy is finally on the horizon. Ramin Mazaheri, Press TV, Paris.
I'd like to welcome my guest to the program, former U.S. Army Psychological Warfare Officer, Mr. Scott Bennett out of San Francisco, and journalist and political commentator, Mr. Richard Millett out of London. Thank you both for being with us. Starting this off in London. And Richard Millett, has there been a total change? We see that now the Free Syrian Army is dropping all preconditions, whereas before they continued to say, before they wanted to really sit down and negotiate, that President Assad must go. Is this very significant that there has been a total now change in strategy in the situation that is happening in Syria?
Well, I think the only change that we have seen has been the annihilation of civilians in eastern Aleppo and the annihilation of opposition forces in Aleppo via the intervention from the air of Russia, the continuation of barrel bombing by the Syrian regime of eastern Aleppo. So obviously there has to be some sort of change because there's been a change on the ground, but it's impossible to see that there's going to be any positive way forward while Assad is still there. While Assad has been responsible for the displacement of 1/4 of his own citizens and the killings of, or contribution to the killing of about 400,000 to 500,000 Syrians, there is no democracy in Syria. And until Assad is somehow removed and democratic elections occur...
Well, right. Mr. Millett, just stay with me. Mr. Bennett, let me get you in on this. I guess you found some of the comments comical. We're still hearing Assad must go. Your take, sir?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is a tragic comedy, and I must admit it is giving me a little bit of laughter and comical relief to hear such ludicrous comments and propaganda. And I worked in propaganda, that's why I find it laughable. Listen, let's make it really simple. What the Friends of Syria want to do to Bashar Assad is exactly what they did to Muammar Gaddafi. Castrate him and kill him with a bayonet and turn the country into a Wahhabi, Takfiri, Salafist chaos and fire that is now spreading up into Europe. They want to do the same thing in Syria so that they can continue on into Iran. There is no other agenda other than this Wahhabi, Takfiri, Salafist, Qatar, Saudi Arabian agenda to finance these mercenaries to push up into Syria and turn it into a hellhole. That's why Russia stepped in. That's why Iran stepped in. That's why China stepped in. This isn't anything about Bashar Assad, who incidentally I think is a very intelligent, very decent, very businesslike man who many United States politicians have supported and have written statements about it, including Senator Dick Black, including Tulsi Gabbard, including Donald Trump, including many others that are coming to the realization that Syria and Bashar Assad must remain in order to destroy this chaos forest fire that's been out of control that the United States CIA and the Pentagon have been throwing gasoline on to erupt into future conflict.
All right, stay with me,
it's
Mr.
ending.
Bennett.
That's why they're so desperate.
Stay with Mr. Bennett. What about what our guest has said, Mr. Miller, guest in San Francisco, that actually many politicians are coming to the realization that, as a matter of fact, it is needed for the stability of the region, for the destroying the terrorists, if that is really the goal, as a matter of fact, to have the Syrian government stay intact, or unless and until the people themselves vote to change it, it actually adds stability to the area and to the country itself. What's your take on that? Because obviously there are a lot of terrorists that are being killed these days there.
Well, I fear that my colleague, Mr. Bennett, would probably have found Hitler charming and intelligent. Just because you're charming and intelligent doesn't mean to say that you're not a brutal demagogue who's killing his own people. I mean, Assad has gassed his own people. He's still barrel bombing them from the air. And it's a tragedy on the ground, what's happened to the Syrian people. And this is all at the behest of Iran, Hezbollah, Assad and Russia, all of these countries having their own regional interests in which they want to control and maintain Syria under their own power structures. And
well, what about Turkey financing chemical weapons? What about Turkey and Saudi Arabia financing? What have you got to say about Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar?
Are we going to have a discussion, or are you just going to act like some demagogue in your own little way?
Oh, please continue. Please continue.
Go ahead, Mr. Miller.
The other alternative, if it wasn't for Wahhabism, is to have a Shia-controlled Syria at the behest of Iran, which is equally brutal in its ways with its what it's been doing in the region as well. So the way to really resolve this problem is for Saudi Arabia and Iran. You can't just say one's responsible. That is completely biased. As our own Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson said, against the will of he was criticised by our own Prime Minister.
Yeah,
but what
that's because he's an idiot. That's why he's criticised.
These two countries have to get round, Iran and Saudi Arabia have to get round the table and bash out their own differences between the two countries, the two ideologies, because until Iran and Saudi Arabia bash out their own differences, there is never going to be peace in the region, whatever takes place.
Okay,
now we see the truth.
Go ahead, Mr. Bennett. Mr. Bennett, you wanted to comment?
Well, Mr. Millett just enunciated the entire Zionist plan to destabilize the Middle East with a inter-Muslim conflict. Aha! Now we see what the true agenda is. Let's get the Saudi Arabians fighting the Iranians. Let's cause all sorts of chaos and rumbling and sectarian fighting, and then there will be peace because they'll all be shattered, wearing burlap, living in crumbling mud huts, and we, the United States and the Israel Zionist lobby, will be able to expand the Greater Israel Project. We'll be able to expand our other influences into the region. We'll be able to do all sorts of empire building. That's been the plan since September 11th, 2001, when they were notoriously implicated in the September 11th attacks. So this plan of causing the Saudi Arabians and Iran and Syria to, quote, hash it out and have a conflict, that's nonsense. That's what the Russians stepped in to stop. No, we're stopping this hashing it out because it's destabilizing all of humanity. And for the sake of all of humanity, we're going to come in and create stability and order and peace and protect this region from another Libyan fall, from another Iraqi fall, from another attempted Egyptian fall. It's not going to go any further. And Europe is waking up to that. That's why the right wing is winning. They're not Hitlerian fascists. They're right-wing national conservative groups in Europe and the United States that are waking up saying, stop these foreign wars.
Stay with me, Mr. Bennett and Mr. Millett. We're going to cross over to our Facebook page and see what some of our viewers have had to say about this subject.
No negotiations. They want to buy time. Please do not give them time. Just wipe these Wahhabi terrorists. You cannot change them because of Wahhabi ideology. They have given bad name to Islam. No negotiations and no ceasefire, please. Get rid of the opposition in Syria. The opposition came to Syria via the US, Turkey, France, the UK and the GCC. Send them in body bags. Let them feel what the innocent civilians have felt for so many years in captivity. There should be no negotiations. These are not opposition but terrorists. No mercy for these evils. These all are responsible for the bloodbath and the slaughtering of innocent people. The opposition needs to be well equipped with more advanced weapons. Move one third to their position in Aleppo. Equip them with missiles and sophisticated anti-aircrafts. The weak can't negotiate. Imminent defeat is on the horizon. Finish them off. The US, Persian Gulf, Arab states and Turkey can once and for all take the mercenaries back. Don't give them a minute to regroup. Just get rid of the Western-backed proxy fighters. The US, the UK or France has no right to decide over the future of Syria.
What about that, Mr. Millett? You heard some of our comments there. And as Syrian forces and Russian Air Force and their allies are on the edge of taking back Aleppo, we've seen a rush conference that has been convened, and the U.S., UK, France, and Germany and others all of a sudden calling for an immediate ceasefire. Word about the humanitarian crisis on the ground. Is it just a play of words? Because we didn't really see that same type of passion when actually the pendulum had actually swung in the other direction. Your take, sir?
Well, no, I disagree. I think there has always been this passion for a ceasefire, for humanitarian relief. We've seen this been going on, these attempted talks have been going on for at least 2 years now. They've repeatedly called for humanitarian ceasefires, and even though some of the citizens have received aid, there obviously isn't enough. I mean, we have seen photos of people starving, of innocent Syrian civilians dead, lying on the streets of their cities and towns in Syria, bombed from the sky by Assad and Iran and Russia. So this passion, this has been an attempt to stop what's been going on for 5 years now. I mean, this all started, as we all know, with the proposed Arab Spring, where the citizens of these countries, all they wanted was democracy. They didn't want to be ruled by demagogues, by
that was a CIA
by
operation by Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, started in 2008. I was there. I know. I was part of the planning.
Okay, go ahead, go ahead. Go ahead, Mr. Millett, you were saying?
So this has been something that's been going on for the last 5 years now, this attempt to democratise the region, and obviously the regimes in charge didn't want the democracy because it would have meant that they would have been out of a job. And unfortunately, the only way for Assad to secure his position is to contribute to the slaughter of 500,000 of his own people, and the displacement of a quarter of his own country.
Well, Mr. Bennett, what about that? It seems that many forget what even General Wesley Clark had said prior, before, of course, all of this had started, about the 7 countries in 5 years and this whole plan to basically destabilize the area. But at this point in time, I want to look at that more than now 20,000 people have been evacuated. Just on today alone in East Aleppo, and overall 50,000 people have been liberated in 2 days, as, of course, the Russians and the Syrians have allowed the free passage. Now, we heard what our guest, Mr. Millett, said in London, the consistent bombing from the air, the destruction of the people and infrastructure. It doesn't really seem that way if we're talking about 50,000 people in 2 days and actually seeming to be very, very happy that they have actually reached safety. Your take, sir, and your perspective, what is really going on?
Well, you wisely identified the most important voice in the room, and that is the Syrian people. The most important people and their opinions that really matter, not Mr. Millett's, not mine, are the people who've lived in Aleppo. And what they're saying when they come out and overrun the Russian reintegration centers, God bless them, thank you for having them, is that we're very thankful to the Russians for protecting us, for destroying the terrorists. We've been under capture and siege by the terrorists who are pretending to be Democrats, who are pretending to be trying for civil rights and all that nonsense. No, they've been about a Wahhabi agenda to create a tyrannical regime of chaos and bloodshed there. That's what Russia and Syria were fighting against. And the Syrian people are coming out confirming that. They're confirming the bestiality of these foreign-backed terrorists who've went into Syria. And there is nothing wrong with destroying these terrorists, these beheaders of women, these rapists of boys, because they are beyond any human decency. And for the fact that the Western nations have backed them in order to remove Assad for regime change is suicidal, because it's now out of control and flooding into Europe. So Russia has stepped in and done the humanitarian action. The only thing they need to do more of is inject some passion when they appear on the United Nations. Mr. Millett mentioned passion. Vitaly Churkin needs to stand up and say, we don't trust the West anymore because you've bombed our convoys, you've financed terrorism, you've done everything that the world community objects to, and we are a voice of protecting people's lives and human rights. And we're not going to give you an inch to breathe. We're not going to give you an inch of ground. We're going to create a highway for you to get out of town, but we're not going to talk to you. We're not going to give you anything because your entire agenda is bloodshed, chaos, and regime change.
Okay.
Those are just the facts. Now, people are trying to spin their way out of it and say it's about humanitarian lives in crisis, but that's all propaganda. And these journalists and these white hats, all CIA, Mossad, MI6 agents. That is all propaganda, so you can't believe a word that comes out of their mouths.
All right, stay with Mr. Bennett. Mr. Millett, what does it mean exactly? I mean, despite the impending liberation of Aleppo, we still hear Western leaders, and they're saying that this does not mean the end to the war in Syria. Is that a message that they're trying to give, that they're going to continue to support the militants no matter what?
Well, I don't think there's been any liberation whatsoever. What we've seen in eastern Aleppo is massacre, the displacement, the fleeing of the residents of eastern Aleppo into regime-held territory, and the disappearance of many of them into possible torture chambers. So to call it a liberation is just not true.
Well, they're coming out with tears of joy, and the women are saying thank you.
I actually think, Mr. Bennett, you're on a different planet. I think you're obsessed with ISIS, Daesh, Islamic State. These are the ones who are the beheaders of people. I think you're on a different planet. But I don't think that we are seeing or wanting any continuation of the war. What they want is, as you outlined at the beginning, is a process where they draw up a new constitution, have new elections, where the Syrian people can then return in safety to their own country.
Not Britain, not the United States, not NATO, not Europe.
The Syrian people, can you please be quiet? I think the last thing that the Syrian people are going to want to do is to return to a country where they've already fled from, because the last thing they want to be under is the power of Assad, who has killed all their relatives and has forced them out of the country in the first place.
Okay,
you aren't going to have a united Syria.
Mr. Bennett, your take. Are we close to the end of this war or not? What is it going to take to actually wrap this all up?
Well, I think you're going to see an exodus of the militants and the terrorists and the Wahhabi Takfiris back into their own lands, back into Saudi Arabia, back into Qatar, back into Kuwait, and hopefully they'll foment the same revolution and overchange that they were trying to do in Syria. That's precisely what needs to happen to end the wars, is the Saudi Arabian regimes and the Qatari regimes and the Kuwaiti regimes, which are all incestuous royal family oppressions and tyrannies. They're not democracies. They're the ones who need to be overthrown, and it's going to be comically ironic when all of these savages come out of Syria and are bussed back into their homes in Riyadh and elsewhere, and suddenly they will probably be engaging in the same overthrow revolutionary activities only on their own lands. Now, I saw personally when I was in the Army, one of the greatest things that these regimes like to do is pay off these criminals and push them out of their country to cause trouble elsewhere. Well, those days are done. Now we're putting them back in their home countries. They're not going to be allowed in Europe. They're certainly not going to be allowed in Russia, Iran, or China. So where are they going to go? They're going to go back to their home turf of Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, and they are going to engage in the regime overthrow of their tyrant dictators. Right. Bashar Assad was voted by his people. Those people in Saudi Arabia were not. They are the subjugators, and they're the ones who need to be removed.
All right. On that note, I thank both of you for being with us. Former U.S. Army Psychological Warfare Officer Mr. Scott Bennett out of San Francisco, and journalist and political commentator Mr. Richard Millett out of London. And as always, viewers, we appreciate you being with us. Join me right here, same time, same place tomorrow on another debate. I'm Marzia Hashemi, signing out.